What is up, people? We are back with Down the Middle podcast. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nomal.
And we're back after a long time.
Yep.
It's been
a
week and a half since we recorded.
A week and a half. I also missed the last one. Sorry for that, guys.
Yeah, I was alone out here.
Stuff going on
at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Abandoned him.
You know what it's like to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning talking politics in an empty garage?
By yourself.
It is actually pretty fun. So we're talking the Biden and Putin summit that happened today. Over there in Russia.
Very, very interesting. Well, actually happened in Switzerland, in Geneva.
Yeah. I'm surprised that
shout out to Geneva.
It didn't happen in Moscow.
I mean, well, Biden was scared that he's a killer, so he would never go there, of course. I don't know if Biden will come back. And that's obviously not because of Putin, right? But yeah, so we're here to talk about that. Happened when it just concluded today.
This morning, yeah.
And great news. There's not much about it. There's a very closed. It was closed behind closed doors to begin with, but also every single media outlet had not much to say about it.
And you can interpret whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. This was obviously this is Biden's most important sit down in his tenure in office. And if you think it's a good thing that there wasn't a lot that came out of it, that's one perspective. I don't think it's a good thing. I think that we should have got, same with the G7 kind of, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot on the table, as there always is, and we should have came out with more concrete action and more like dates and more physical, tangible things we can kind of look forward to, but we didn't get that. So we'll kind of break down what happened. They spoke for about 3 or 4 hours. So we'll talk about what they did talk about, but more importantly, maybe what they didn't.
Yeah. So we'll probably just start off with, I guess, what we know, what they talked about, and then move on to what we think they should have talked about. And then, hopefully our kind of like vision for what should be happening in the future post-summit.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we don't have the footage of their meeting. It hasn't been released yet. All we have are reports from actually all left-wing outlets.
We're not VIP yet.
Yeah, we're not VIP yet. We weren't there with Putin. I mean, he's stopping by later tonight to tell us what went down for real, but we weren't there. I couldn't make it. I had work. So we haven't seen the footage. No one has seen the footage, but we read a lot of articles based on what the reporters said. Just to start with some background between Biden and Putin's relationship. So Biden's been in politics for 50 years.
Yeah.
He's had encounters with Putin before, and I think publicly lately it's come up that Putin doesn't really respect Biden that much. You had very early him saying that he wants a face-to-face with Biden, kind of like in a call-out type of way.
Yeah, it was more of a call-out. I think we brought it up in like one of the first videos that we actually talked about. More a call-out type of thing. That was also after the comments that Biden made saying that he was a killer back in March.
Yeah.
So he just started off his presidency with that tension to begin with. And then I think, before this meeting, like we spoke about off the podcast, they last met around 2011 during Obama's presidency.
Yes.
And if you want to bring up the little thing you told me.
Yeah, so I was watching a MSNBC interview with Putin today. I was just watching it before I got in today. And the big pushing point that Biden he painted himself out as like this really like badass figure with the sunglasses on.
Yeah.
That's walking around with the fire behind him.
Almost as badass as that Ford commercial.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You want to see me go fast?
And it wasn't even him driving?
It wasn't even him driving. Yeah. So in this imaginary meeting that Joe Biden had with Putin, he says to Putin, he looks him in the eyes from a very close proximity and says, I don't see a soul. And then Putin says, then we understand each other. Like, that's great. I mean, that's like we want to see from like Vin Diesel, the bad guy.
In a movie, though. Yeah. I wouldn't want that in real life.
Like, I expect that from Batman.
Yeah.
Like, you have no soul. And the Joker's like, and we understand each other. Like, that's like Batman and the Joker. This is Putin Putin and Biden. But then Putin said he has no recollection of that meeting. Like, he goes, I'm sure Biden has. I guess I do the Russian accent. I'm sure Biden has a good memory, but I don't remember this meeting.
He's the access guy, obviously. You can tell. But yeah, obviously, Putin does not care about what Biden has to say, let alone the fact that he just does not even remember that he was probably vice president in 2011. He's like, who's this new guy? But yeah, Putin he lives in a world of his own, and he's not afraid about anything or anyone, which should scare us because I think I'm going to speak for you as well. We don't think Biden is someone who would put the pressure on especially Putin, when it's needed the most.
We've seen him not put the pressure on, and we'll talk about this later. I don't want to get into too much of not putting pressure on where pressure should be, but him being very, very passive with a lot of things where we want like that strong president. And to feed off of you saying about the killer statement, just yesterday I did a video about him going back on those words before he gets face to face with Putin. You know, first of all, one thing that was good about Donald Trump's presidency is Trump and Putin sound so different. And Biden and Putin sound so similar. I keep on messing the names up. Like, you would never mess up Trump and Putin, but you can mess up Biden and Putin so simply.
Yeah.
But one thing that Biden said the other day was that he that statement about Putin being a killer isn't so important now. When I mean, that's the most important statement that you can make before you sit down with what the American people want to be an aggressive meeting where you stand up for us. I think that's an important thing, but Biden stepped back on that.
Yeah, and he stepped back at it right before the summit, right?
Yeah,
and it just goes to show you like a day before. Oh, the day before. Yeah. So it's like, you're talking shit about the team that you're about to play in the finals, and then right before the game, like, yeah, he's a good player, and you're guarding him the whole game afterwards. It's like, why'd you take that statement back? Especially, the right time would have been right after you said it, right? But then now the worst time is right before you're at the summit.
Exactly, because like they asked him about this statement over and over. This was his most defiant statement of his presidential election, was that Vladimir Putin's a killer. And like Vladimir Putin is real too. It's not like you're saying that about about a president of a tiny little country who can just like talk smack about freely. Everyone is aware Vladimir Putin is a ruthless guy. He will do whatever it takes. Yeah. That's like saying LeBron James sucks before you play him.
Yeah, and then he puts 40 on your head.
He puts 40, exactly. Yeah. Like before, when you line up across from him, you're gonna say,
"Oh, hey, by the way,
he's actually."
You're great.
I mean, he's great. Like, when you were asking Joe Biden about this over and over again, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?
He has not retracted the statement
until you get faced. It's just that I think that's a big sign of. I don't want to call it weakness, but I do want to call it kind of. I don't know what the term I want to put it, because I don't want to call him weak for saying that. I think it was stupid to say in the first place.
It's stupid to say in the first place. But when you make stupid statements like that, well, there's a difference, because the way he mishandled the whole statement to begin with. Because one, like I said earlier, if you're gonna make a statement like that, you should probably retract it, especially being the president of the United States. And then also the fact that if you're gonna not retract it, if you're gonna keep on going with that statement all the way up until the last moment, that just goes to show like when it's pressure time, you don't know what to do.
And especially to just go back a little bit, 2011, he was fine saying that to Putin's face, allegedly.
Yeah.
He has no soul.
Yeah.
But then why is it now that you retracted it? Like, the world wasn't watching in 2011. When the world is watching, you take that statement back. Yeah. But just to get into the meeting itself, obviously the pretense we've said about it was that it was more business compared to a friendly meeting. The Donald Trump meetings, if you watch the videos, it seems to be a more personable interaction between Trump was complimenting Putin more. There was more of a... it was more of a friendly type of atmosphere.
Yeah.
It doesn't not say Trump and Putin are friends, but there was a different type of dynamic to that. Biden-Putin's meeting was very more just like business and then leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also said that both in their post-summit conferences, press conferences, that not much was talked about. So they had, like I was telling you before, it's more like they talked about what they should talk about in the future, but not more so anything actionable or anything that would produce any immediate results.
One thing that it reminds me of is like something that bothers me is when like people, like when we go and hang out, we talk with our friends, we talk about everything going on. But there's a lot of groups that I've been with, you go and hang out, and the kind of the main topic is the next time you're going to hang out. It's like, oh, we should go do this, we should go do this, we should do this.
Right.
And then in the actual moment of hanging out, you don't actually enjoy it, you just plan the next one. And that's kind of like what Biden and Putin are doing.
Yeah, that's actually exactly how it went down. And they both say that that's exactly how it went down too.
Yeah, pretty much, which is a shame, because you had a lot of stuff you wanted them to speak about that you didn't get.
Yeah, and on top of that, so they spoke to each other, for like a couple hours, and then when they brought up their larger groups, or like their personal aides and like whoever was part of like security departments, all that stuff like that, they also stated that they didn't have much to talk about. So how are you gonna go from a summit between the U.S. and Russia, have little to talk about to begin with, but then have your larger groups and not have anything to talk about?
And it's important too, because we've been tracking all day trying to find news about this, because we knew we were going to come in tonight and this is what we wanted to talk about. And usually when these things happen, like when you had the presidential debates or you have the meeting with Congress, there's a media explosion directly after.
Round the clock coverage.
You don't even have to search for it.
No, nothing. It just comes up.
This was quiet. The G7 was quiet. NATO was quiet. This was quiet, because there's not a lot being discussed, and it's a shame. And just one thing that I support is that, so a thing that Donald Trump put out is that it's better for the world when Russia and America are friends.
Absolutely.
They do better for the economically, Putting the word trust out there with Vladimir Putin is very dangerous, even though Biden did say that he trusts Putin, which is a direct contradiction between things he said in the past.
Yeah, like, you could trust a killer?
Exactly. I don't know. You could trust someone without a soul. I mean, who you've said that to in the past, but, like, the world is a better place when America doesn't have that many, like, real physical adversaries. So that was the reason behind Trump's meeting being more friendly, Biden's meeting being more business-oriented, so...
Yeah, so... What they talked about, the few things that they actually talked about was cybersecurity, Iran and their nuclear presence, peace in Afghanistan, and I believe one more I'm missing.
They talked about Syria as well.
Syria as well.
Yep. And the Ukraine.
And Ukraine, but very, very little of Ukraine, because that's more of a soft spot for Russia. But that's literally all that was stated in the press conference.
And a little bit of prisoner stuff too. Alexei Navalny and then the 2 Marines who are in prison as well.
Yeah, so obviously you can tell, like, there were not much topic, like 3 hours, and that's all you talk about. I don't know.
That's a boring conversation.
That's a really boring conversation. But yeah, I mean, what do you want to start off with?
Well, basically, you have the things that Putin is against and is hard against. He's against NATO expansion. He's against. He says that the U.S. has been hypocritical with their treatment with Iran. With Afghanistan, and has been hypocritical in terms of how we critique Russia in terms of intruding on our internal affairs. Russian collusion for 4 years. We were talking about Russian bounties, but he says we're hypocritical on that too because there is U.S. intervention into Russian internal affairs. And obviously Ukraine is the big one too. Right. Ukraine is kind of Putin's hard no. He says that he's not looking for compromise on militaristic expansion on the eastern border. He's not looking for peace with Ukraine. Ukraine is really has always been the big one for Russia.
Yeah.
That they're not willing to go back and forth on.
Yeah, and then on that note, so like you said, he's not looking for any type of solution with Biden, and that's a big problem because Ukraine's our ally. Yeah. And during the post-summit press conference, Putin did say that Biden brought up Ukraine, but it was not talked about in length. So what does that go to show? Like, you can't, I kind of compare this to Israel because when you have to step up for your ally, we really aren't stepping up for Ukraine. Yeah. And how does that portray the U.S., the rest of the world, and the rest of our allies? If it was brought for, just a few moments, especially when, like, they have not been backing down at all, that's also, in my opinion, a sign of weakness on our part.
And, like, the thing is, how I see it is that, like, you need to prioritize. You don't need to prioritize these things. Like, Russia is a bigger adversary than Ukraine is an ally. Russia is a bigger adversary than Israel is an ally because Russia is a huge adversary to us. They have a lot of potential for what they could do to us. But that isn't something that you take into account when you talk about defending your allies. Right. But just because you're going as a big bully doesn't mean you back down again when it comes to them fighting your weak friends. You still want to stand up for the people who you want to stand up for. And that's kind of like the dynamic here. Like you said, Ukraine wasn't talked about a lot. That's a big issue because Russia is it's the same thing with China and Taiwan. I mean, China is a bigger adversary than Taiwan as an ally. Yeah, not even close. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to defend Taiwan. So
yeah, and also, like, it's one thing because we have to defend them, but also we have to defend our own image of how we are portrayed as an ally to these countries as well.
And a very hypocritical thing there is that when I was watching Biden's post-press conference, he said that kind of like, and one thing I want to talk about, we'll get into, is the lack of repercussions. He said that one indirect repercussion that people don't take into account is worldwide credibility. So, like, when Russia makes cyber attacks, they lose.
Biden said this?
Yeah, which is completely true.
Yeah,
so
it's true.
When Russia does cyber attacks, they lose worldwide credibility and stuff, and that's true. But how about when you don't stand up for your allies?
Yeah,
you lose worldwide credibility too. Absolutely. Your allies notice immediately. So, I mean, Biden not really thinking too much with that one, but it's okay.
Yeah. And then another topic they talked about that should have been bigger was cybersecurity. So they did talk about in the summit, but definitely not much was produced or we could have got anything out of it. So basically, Biden, I guess asked Putin about cybersecurity attacks on all the colonial pipelines, and then Putin did say that he was aware of it, but he had no recollection or more so involvement in the cyber attacks. So it's easy to I mean, that's a smart move by Putin. Like, if you deny something or your involvement in something, it's really hard to prove in the first place that you are involved. Especially since we can't even investigate and see their true involvement in it. But it also didn't look like there was much, backlash or prodding from Biden himself.
Yeah, and like the thing is that you obviously had the Colonial Pipeline hack, and you had the JBS hack, and no, you can't prove right now that Putin was involved in these things, but you can prove that it's Russian companies, and you don't just want this to be us. This is one of the biggest issues in terms of our national security right now. It probably is the biggest issue.
I think it's the biggest issue.
Yeah, so you want more than just letting the thing that we spoke about is Putin's method of response. Is when you say to Putin, you guys are making cyber attacks on us. This is bad. You need to stop. Putin says, well, America has a huge cyber attack operation too. That's not the response. Even that may be true. America does. I don't know the stats, but I'm sure America has an amazingly powerful cyber attack force. And then Putin even said that we don't have one,
which is completely false.
Even so, in this meeting of world leaders, you can't let kind of like our actions, past wrongs, justify your present wrongs. Even if they do, there's no examples given. But if that's your argument, if that's your argumentative kind of mechanism you're going to employ there, you have to say, well, that doesn't answer my question. Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't answer the question. So what would have been a better approach after he said something like, well, we don't have any involvement with that? Well, you would have to keep on asking questions and see how, because we want a result. That's at the end of the day. That's what we have. This NATO meetings. That's what we have the G7 summit. This summit. We want results. So, so you would have to say like, well, obviously these attacks are coming in Russia. That's we all know this, and Putin would have some sort of hand in terms of what he could do with these companies.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to at least know. No, and the fact that it's a huge, it's not just like they attacked our podcast and we got shadow banned. Yeah. This is a huge attack on YouTube. This is a huge attack on America. It destroyed our economy. We were just talking about gas prices, how he pays $3.60 to fill up his tank and it pains him like
a gallon.
And this is a huge thing. Our meat got cut out. I mean, I'm not a vegan. I respect vegans, but like that's not okay. I'm sure they weren't affected, but that's not okay. These are huge things, and they're happening from. You don't see like Russia's economy being shut down by American hackers, and that was the question. That's actually a good thing that Biden did do. And just for the record, I don't think that Biden did bad at all in this meeting. I don't think that he did. I know that he brought postcards in, and U.S. reporters were shoved out, and there was kind of like different shows of weakness compared to Putin that he put on. We speak about how there was a lack of things brought up and a lack of questions, but in terms of just presentation, I don't think he did bad. I think he could have done much better, though.
At the same time, this is still behind closed doors, so it's not much to base it off of.
And we'll have to see when the footage actually comes out. Maybe he did better, maybe he did worse. Maybe he muttered all over the floor, but we don't know yet. The thing is, though, he did ask Putin, what if we hacked like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? How would your response be? And Putin obviously would not be, that would not be good if you guys did that. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good thing, too. You like to create scenarios to give the other person a kind of perspective into your thinking, you know?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which is a good thing, too. That's an easy way to get an answer from someone who doesn't want to answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put them in the position. Another thing that they spoke about was U.S. prisoners. You have two former U.S. Marines who are in prison in Russia, Trevor Reed and Paul Whelan. And in terms of talking about their release, Putin was not open to releasing them, but he did talk about a prisoner swap. This has been a thing for a couple years with America and Russia about these two Marines who are in jail. So nothing was reached there either.
Do you know how long they were there?
I don't know how long, but I know that it has been a decent amount of time.
We gotta get them boys home.
Yeah, that's a big thing too. And Putin's answer to that is, well, hey, you have hundreds of Russian fettered workers in prison. Yeah. Which, like, this form of argument, this form of response is effective. It just doesn't produce results.
Yeah, Putin he's smart. He's a smart, very smart guy. So the way especially with reporters, he answers those questions with comparisons, and that's his way of deflecting. Yeah. It goes back to the post-summit press conference for Putin when a reporter asked Putin what is he scared about, because since he either killed, jailed, or sent off his political opponents. And then what was his response? You said something about...
he compared it to January 6th.
Oh, he compared it to January 6th, and then he compared it to
Alexei Navalny.
Yeah, and then you also brought up a couple other things.
About what he compared it to?
Yeah.
His political opponents?
Yeah.
Let me see. Imprisoning his political... I don't remember what he compared it to.
I forgot, but he basically compared it to other things where his actions were the same as the U.S. in terms of like what the report was bringing up. So that was his way of saying, if you guys are doing it as a world power, then the way we're doing it and what we have in Russia is okay as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know he did it with January 6th. We spoke about Alexei Navalny and U.S.
Oh, Guantanamo Bay.
Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, exactly.
And a couple others, yeah.
And he did it because Alexei Navalny is his political opponent who is imprisoned because he was his political opponent. Yeah. And when we say Vladimir Putin is ruthless, we mean it in the rawest form.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his response to that, do you have any remorse? What if Alexei Navalny dies in prison? He says, no, I have no remorse. You guys are prosecuting hundreds of people for the January 6th, which is just a political expression as well. This is the way he answers these things. He's a former KGB officer.
He knows
he knows the deal.
He's been through all these questions before. You're not going to faze him by asking him a question like that.
He knows the deal. And so no kind of compromise on Navalny. This is just something that's like more of a moral standard for America, is trying to get a political opponent out of jail. Because obviously, as a supporter of democracy, advocate for democracy, we don't like to see political opponents get locked up based on the merit that they're political opponents. It's
also hard to, give our version of democracy to other countries.
Yeah.
Especially with the world power like Russia. And especially when we have a lot of problems of our own. It's kind of hard to focus on that as well.
Which is why I'm okay with him backing off the Navalny issue. Yeah. I mean, that's not really our place.
Yeah.
So, but it was good for him to bring it up. Not really our place, but then again, you do want to just see democracy. I believe in democracy. Through and through. I think it's an amazing thing, but like you said, we can't force that on anyone.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And then another reporter, so this is, that reporter was for Putin, but another reporter named Caitlin Collins asked Biden, as he was walking away, excuse me, why are you so sure that Putin, I think she said he will change his behavior, obviously regarding to Putin. And then he came back around, stormed, not really stormed, but like, he got a little aggressive, but rightly so, because she did kind of take his words, put some words into his mouth. He didn't say that he was sure, that he's like, we were hoping for a change of behavior. Then at the end of the day, that's pretty true, because with these summits and with these meetings, it doesn't matter what words are really said. It's about the action that come forth afterwards. So he said, I'm not sure, but progress is progress, and we're hoping that some type of progress will happen in regards to his actions.
And this is an unfortunate thing that we see with America, because you saw it with Fauci in China too, the Wuhan lab, where, and now you see it here, where basically the idea is that how do you know that they're going to adhere to the principles you're setting in place now? And it's just kind of like, I mean, we don't know.
Right.
But and what we saw about before is that it seems much more likely that if some kind of compromise is put into place, that Joe Biden would follow the rules of that agreement rather than Vladimir Putin or any other, or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un or anybody of any one of those countries. We seem much more likely to adhere to that than anyone else would, which is, I mean, it's a shame in the most respectful sense, because like, we're doing the right thing, but then you also have to understand that they're not.
Yeah, it's kind of like between a rock and a hard place, because do you do the right thing, or do you play by the same game and by the same rules? I mean, it's a hard way to, you can't. There's no right or wrong way to do it, I think, and it's definitely a hard decision to make.
Yeah, and then like that feeds into kind of the biggest talking point that I wanted for this video is what Joe Biden says he wants from it is he wants more predictable behavior out of Russia, and he said the biggest thing that he put out when we talk about the cyber attacks and whatnot is that he apparently named 16 areas that are critical infrastructure where cyber attacks, he wants to have a conversation about them being banned from those 16 places. And now just our thing with, we talk about a lack of repercussions and a lack of action. You can't demand predictability from a world power. Like we always talk about, this is an effort to get ahead, to do what's best for your nation. And he even said that he needs to do what's best for America. That being predictable is a flaw. You don't be predictable and do what's best for your nation.
I don't even get that statement. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, I don't know. I was just thinking as you were speaking. I was just thinking like an analogy. And I was just thinking about like, I don't know, maybe a player maybe like PJ Tucker. I don't know if you guys watch basketball, but PJ Tucker has been playing like a football player out there during the playoffs. So it's kind of like KD asking PJ Tucker, like, "Oh, can you just be a little bit more predictable with your fouling?"
Yeah.
It's like, just stop the fouling.
Yeah.
So stop the act. Stop. We want action. We want a halt in negative action, especially when it has to do with national security in the U.S. So we want you to stop, or do something about the attacks coming from your country. But instead, he's asking for more like a heads up, or having zones where you can't attack. That's not what we want. Mm-hmm. We want a complete halt of those type of actions, and that's not what we're asking for.
Yeah, and obviously, repercussions are what you want. You want to tell Putin, look, you've done this stuff in the past. Even if there are no repercussions for this stuff in the past, if you do this again, this is what's going to happen. You don't want to say to him, you've done this stuff in the past, we'll let it go, but can you just not do it in the future?
Yeah.
That's being predictable. Or if you're going to do it in the future, just tell me beforehand.
Just tell me beforehand. You give me, a postcard beforehand, and then you're we'll be prepared.
Yeah, just send me an Instagram message that you're going to shut down our economy, and then it'll all be good.
Oh, okay, sounds good. All right.
And in terms of the 16 areas of critical infrastructure, what does that even mean? Water supply was one of them, and I forget what the other ones were, and we don't even know what the list is, because this was alleged after that he said these 16 things. He said it in his press conference, but so what about if they were to cyber attack another area that's not in the 16 areas? Is that okay? Is there less repercussions? Are we not going to do anything about it?
Yeah, because you gave me the predictability, and then you also didn't attack the 16 sites, so I guess it's all right.
It obviously is not that those 16 encompass everything,
right?
Because if those 16 encompass everything, then you would just say no cyber attacks. You wouldn't specifically say 16.
Yeah, and how's that your response to Putin saying that he has no idea what these attacks are about?
Exactly, yeah. It's like he completely disregards our attempts to kind of prove him accountable, and then your thing is okay, just don't do this.
Yeah, it's like saying if you do have any involvement, just make sure you don't hit these sites.
Yeah, exactly, because we really need these.
Yeah. And Putin's like, okay.
It's appeasement, and you've seen appeasement in the past. It never works out.
Yeah, I'm also curious because how does that come up in conversation if there's a deniement of involvement?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So why would you even bring that up?
And this is why it's important for the public to see these things, because you can just imagine the awkwardness of these conversations. If it's a business meeting with just them, there's no moderation between them. Right. They're just having a conversation where they have to list all the things that they're mad about.
Yeah.
And he denies it to Biden's face, so Biden knows that, whoever is above Biden, because there's a bunch of people above him, are telling him, you have to talk about this. He's just just don't do this, please. And then Putin's like, I just denied involvement.
It's this wasn't in my flashcards.
He's like,
they didn't write what my response would be.
But then obviously just trying to get to the end of the video, the biggest thing after that thing we just talked about there,
what?
With the restrictions on what they are allowed to do. You don't want them to attack these certain things. That was a big thing, too. You didn't want that. But then we also talked about there was a lot of things they didn't mention, too. Israel they didn't mention.
Yeah, so that's all what they talked about. So what they should have been talking about, for the first thing we want to talk about was the climate change, because Biden said that's one of the biggest threats that we have.
It's the biggest.
But if this is the biggest threat, and everybody has a part in climate change, especially China, which is a whole different conversation, then why wasn't it brought up in the summit between the U.S. and Russia when you have 2 out of the 3 biggest world powers there?
Yeah, they talked about it at the G7 summit. It was the main one of the main topics. But then when you're sitting down, if we're going to believe that Joe Biden's biggest threat is climate change, then why not say, and hey, what are you doing for the climate? What can we come to for the climate? Can we reach a kind of agreement? Nothing. So is it really your biggest concern then if you didn't talk about it with one of the world's strongest countries?
Absolutely. And then another red flag is the origins of COVID-19.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about the origins of COVID-19.
China in general.
Or China in general, yeah, and what they're doing behind closed doors, because they have not been giving information to WHO or anybody really, for that matter.
And one thing that they did speak about a little bit is human rights abuses between Russia and different things that they've done with Putin, with different things he's done in the past. This is a big concern for Biden, obviously, and Putin has said it's a big concern for him too. So why not mention the human rights abuses about China? If you want to mention CO2,
camps.
The Uyghur camp. If you want to mention CO2 emissions, and obviously get them on board. Does Russia not want to know about COVID origin?
Yeah.
Not even mention it to them, because one thing that we've spoken about is the scary prospect of U.S. versus Russia and China.
Yeah.
So you want to do everything you can. Don't act like you're not aware of that. like you're aware of the prospect that you're the United States president, the one thing you want to do is definitely try to get Russia on your side.
Absolutely.
To get away from that idea, because that's a very scary idea.
And I think one way to do that would be bringing up the origin of COVID-19, because obviously China's a culprit in terms of the Wuhan lab. And that's one thing, because, you know, you relate to people and form connections through similarities or commonalities, right? So obviously everybody's been affected by COVID-19, and if they connect on that aspect, they could definitely come together and really, you know, force China to like, hey, listen, this is real shit, and we're going to do something about it.
And like we said, Putin is a smart guy. He is ruthless and he is a killer, but he is also, if China is guilty for this, he's going to make them pay. Yeah. He's a strong leader too, for his people. He is.
For his people, yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing is Israel.
Yeah, so and that's another red flag, because Russia's recent involvement, like we said before we called it. By the way, I'm going to bring that up in every
You think I'm
video.
joking when I say we have Putin in here?
No, like literally, he's right. He's right
he sits in the back. He tells us.
He's actually recording right now. He's a new Phil. So Russia's recent involvement with the whole Israel and Palestine conflict, and then also Israel being our allies, that's also a very surprising thing that wasn't talked about, because obviously there was some sort of tension between us, Israel, Palestine, obviously, and Russia, since Russia's wanting to have some sort of involvement and having some sort of, you know, being a diplomatic leader as being a world power. And then also, I forgot my train of thought.
Well, I mean, Russia waged war against Israel.
Yeah, Russia waged war.
Yeah, we didn't say anything about that.
Oh, and then I also want to bring, okay, so now I remember the recent ceasefire.
Yeah.
And that was before the summit. I'm very surprised to hear that they didn't even bring that up. Mm-hmm. And see, because like, if Russia did threaten Israel to stop, and then now with the ceasefire happening before the summit, I'm very surprised that even, you know, Biden didn't ask Russia what their plans were in terms of Israel.
I mean, obviously you have the United States, which is the world power. You have Russia, which is a competing world. They want to get to that place. And you have China, which is out there. These are your three big countries. And you come together, and they both made statements about Israel and Palestine. You'd expect them to at least say something. If the true interest, this is how you kind of differentiate. Is the true interest world power, or is it peace in the Middle East? Because if it's peace in the Middle East, it definitely comes up. Mm-hmm. You definitely make a plan. But if it's world power, then it makes sense why they wouldn't talk about that, because they want to treat it differently.
Right.
So you can kind of see where values may lie with that. But, I mean, overall, obviously we always say with this administration that actions speak louder than words. This time we didn't get much words.
Or any really information, really.
We didn't get any really information. But wait, of course, until we see the full thing. But these are all reports from people who watched it and from the press conferences, which we watched. So, I mean, it didn't go horribly wrong. But there's also something to say about a lack of information, which is definitely a wrongdoing to the people of the world. Yeah. So it didn't go very right either.
Yeah, and I think more so, you know, as closing comments, at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't even matter what was said at the summit. It's more so about what actions are going to come forth after that summit, because that's really how we'll, you know, see what we'll have to do afterwards in terms of what Russia will do in terms of cyber attacks, if they, you know, admit involvement, and any other, you know, things, especially with China, like, will we come together or will we not? So more so the actions we'll see in the next, you know, 6 months to a year, and really go from there.
And exactly 6 months to a year. One thing I forgot to include is that in his press conference, Joe Biden did say that this is all just speculation, and we need to wait 6 months to a year to kind of see how it's going to play out. Yeah. Which is, it's true, but it's also scary, because that's why you want to have those kind of preemptive repercussions put in place. Right. Because then you know.
Because if this doesn't happen in 6 months to a year, then this is going to happen.
Are we going to put up for cyber attacks for a year?
Right. It's
and then act on it? Like, that's why you want to have those threats in place. But, of course, we'll see what happens. We can only kind of just wait. But Putin v. Biden 1 in the books. Winner goes to China.
We'll have Putin v. Biden 2. Fight night next week.
Next Wednesday night, 8:30. But we're all good for today. We got another video coming up. We're going to do a response video to something that Joe Biden just said. So we will catch you guys then. All right?
Peace.
Peace out.